brief intro. In the interest of time, I'll introduce you in brief. So we have Smith Shah joining as a moderator for this panel. Smith Shah is President of Drone Federation of India. We have Vipul Singh, CEO of Arav Unmanned Systems, joining as a panelist. We have Mr. C.S. Sharma, Joint Director, Quality Council of India, joining as panelist. We have Professor S.N. Wonkar, who is Chief Research Scientist at Indian Institute of Science, joining as a panelist. With that, Mr. Smith Shah, over to you to get started with the panel discussion.
Hi, thank you, Satish. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes.
Very good evening to everyone who's joined with us today. I'll request all the panel members to turn on their video if it's possible, so that we can have a more engaging discussion. Okay, so we have Mr. C.S. Sharma, Professor Omkar, Vipul. I hope you have joined in too. And we have Sashwat.
Yeah, Smith Shah. So Sashwat couldn't join. There is some unexpected, difficulty from his end, so he couldn't join.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so just a quick audio check. Vipul, are you joined in with us? Vipul, if you can hear me, you're on mute. Okay, Professor Omkar, a quick check.
Yeah, very good evening.
Good evening, sir. Good to see you.
Yeah, same here.
Mr. C.S. Sharma.
Good evening, Smith. I'm there, yeah.
Good evening. C.S., if you could be a slightly louder.
Sure. Yeah. Now you can hear me?
Yes, that's perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think maybe Vipul is having some connectivity issue. I'll request Team SAE India to just check with him. And in the interest of everyone's time, I would want to begin today's session. So thank you everyone for joining in, and thank you for joining in this session and discussing this very important issue, which is to do with the entire standardization and various aspects around the UAV ecosystem. Before we begin today's discussion and we pick our minds with the speakers, I would want to give a brief insight on what's happening in the UAV space. For our attendees who may not be following the recent developments, last year in August of 2021, the government of India published a notification and a new set of rules called the Drone Rules 2021. This basically was the rule that was the defining moment for the drone industry. And under these rules, basically the entire policy framework of the country has been liberalized. Before this, we had various regimes like the no permission, no takeoff, and various regulatory requirements, including by way of a lot of licenses. But after Drone Rules 2021, a master document, a rule under which the entire governance of the drone ecosystem can happen, has been notified, specifically 25th August 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And the entire governance of manufacturing, operations, training, and various other aspects of the drone ecosystem are now brought in under Drone Rules 2021. Now, these rules specify the requirements for different types of basic compliances, like if you are a manufacturer, what you need to do to sell a compliant drone in the ecosystem. If you are a service provider, what you need to do to ensure that you have valid and legal drones through which you can provide services by way of registration or any other compliance, as well as the valid manpower. So in case you are a company that is into drone services, then what is the compliance that you need to follow, both from the equipment side as well as from the drone pilot side, in case they are operating drones on behalf of your company. So that's covered. Moving forward, when the drone operations need to be scaled, there will be a requirement of drone corridors being set up, unmanned traffic management being set up. So those aspects have also been introduced briefly in the rules, and that's what essentially showcases that the rules overall provide a governance framework for all aspects of drones, whether it is the smaller class of drones or the bigger class of drones with maximum takeoff weight up to 500 kilograms. whether it is the short visual line of sight operations or the long range beyond visual line of sight operations. All of these operations, whether it is the remotely piloted operations or the automation or automated operations where no remote pilot is required, all of these aspects are covered under the single rule, and it is, I believe, safe and very logical to say that the rules in the Indian ecosystem now cover all types of drone operations, and everything where an unmanned aircraft is going to fly with weight up to 500 kilograms is covered under Drone Rules 2021. So that's the brief sort of development that's happened in August of 21. Later on, we had the production linked incentive scheme under which the government gives incentive to drone manufacturers, which came up. A simple example would be if a manufacturer does a revenue of 1 crore, and if the purchase cost of his drone parts or raw material is about 40 lakh rupees, then the selling price minus the purchase cost is considered as the value addition. Even though the value addition may have various cost components like operational expenditure, electricity expenses, salaries, and all of that, still that 60 lakh rupees in this example is considered as the local value addition. And on that 60 lakh rupees, as the example, government is giving 20% incentive. So imagine if you, by this example, had 1 crore of revenue, the government would give you back about 12 lakhs approximately, which is the 20% of that 60 lakh rupees as a financial incentive. And just to sort of share with everyone, this is not a tax exemption. This is not an incentive where you don't pay tax in the future. This is cash flow and cash incentive coming back to your bank account. So this is a very solid incentive that is coming in. And the PLI scheme for drone and drone components is one of the schemes where the sort of the incentive is as high as 20%. So that's the second development that happened. The third development that happened in the drone ecosystem was a blanket ban on import of drones. This is to boost domestic manufacturing. So if you are a drone manufacturer in the country and you are just starting out and you are sort of importing all the components and assembling here, well, I will not comment on whether that's the right approach or not, but legally, that type of business is also allowed. This is to ensure that all types of manufacturing or sale of drones in the country happens through Indian manufacturing effort. So whether it's a foreign company or an Indian company, they can follow all the due processes and sell the drone in the country as well as export. But the manufacturing unit or the final assembly unit has to be in India. That's the purpose of the drone import ban, to ensure that local manufacturing and domestic manufacturing can be boosted. And during this entire assembly or manufacturing processes, the learnings of the process are with the Indian stakeholders and the employees who are employed at various manufacturing units, which was the third incentive. First, as I mentioned, was Drone Rules 2021. Second, production linked incentive scheme. Third, import ban. And the fourth one, which is we are seeing that government is acting as a market maker, which is sort of doing large scale procurement of drones and drone services. So just to give a few examples, the Indian Army right now is expected to procure drones worth approximately 2,000 crores in the next 12 months or so. All major mining projects that have a sizable area need to undergo at least one drone survey to meet their annual regulatory compliances. All new projects that are coming in the railways and the roadways, drone surveys have become almost compulsory and are also being accepted in some cases as a proof for making payment, that whether the contractor has done the job or not. So that's the kind of focus that this sector is getting, whether it is in terms of policy, financial incentive, or it is in terms of government procuring drones in large quantities or services in large quantities. We have also seen that the private sector is sort of procuring drones in a very large way. So the long explanation and long introduction was required because a lot of people think of drones as either just a recreational photography tool, or if they even have the understanding of the technology, they don't probably have the understanding of what's happening in the overall ecosystem. Why are people talking about drones? Why is India talking about reforms in the drone sector? Which is why I thought maybe it's very important to put a context on and a overall sort of background on what is happening in the drone sector and where are we going as such. Now I would want to move on to our panelists. So we see that we have Vipul also joined in now. Initially, there were some connection issues, I guess. Today's topic is a very important one, which is going to sort of play a very deciding factor on whether India can be not just a drone hub, but a drone manufacturing hub. What are the key requirements for that, and what are the sort of key drivers that are going to act in that? And with that, I will start posing a few questions to my panelists. I hope you can give short remarks for the initial questions, and then I'll give everyone an opportunity to sort of counter each other or give a longer remark. The first question I have from the manufacturing perspective. So Vipul runs a company called Arav Unmanned Systems, also rebranded as Aero, and has been into manufacturing and various types of services. Vipul, you've been operating different types of drones, and you may have interacted with different systems and different subcomponents. What do you feel is this entire need of having standards? Pretty much all the different components are available easily from outside. People have been assembling drones and various RC aircraft since quite some time. So from a manufacturer's perspective, do you feel that there is any need for these types of standards, or is that a advantageous thing or a disadvantageous thing? If you could do a very basic context setting on that front.
Sure. No, I mean, definitely there is a notion that standards bring a lot of organization in the industry. And how they bring the organization in the industry is that while we are contemplating so many critical use cases to be served with the drones, and many of them are going to be also directly affecting the economic activities in the country and how the sectors are going to grow and increase their efficiency by using the technology. And they will be operating in a very wide variety of environment as well. When we talk about mines, when we talk about oil and gas refineries, we talk about road infrastructure, we talk about drones flying over villages and cities. In fact, even drone doing a lot of agricultural spraying as well is one of the use case. And then eventually we are also looking at logistics and transportation applications using drones, right? So we're going to have a lot of integration of this technology with different other, or I would say different kind of airspaces, and it will be flying over different type of population and infrastructure. And the repercussions or negative repercussions of any drone failure is going to be very high. For example, a 20 lakh rupees drone can cause damages worth more than 25-30 crores if it, or even more if it falls over a very critical infrastructure. So I think the first challenge with which the standards solve is to bring reliability in the ecosystem, so that no one goes and integrates an unreliable product and starts flying and operating it over some critical infrastructure and over people and poses some safety and security threat. So only when it is reliable, people will have the confidence to adopt this technology more and more and bring it as a critical part of their business. So that's point number one. And then point number two is that, of course, the downstream impact of this is the scalability of the ecosystem. It just brings scalable operations so that there is lesser dependencies on, let's say, manual assessment of the health of equipment or its integrity in the whole process. So you also want to see that while the drone is reliable in few flights or the first flight, it can execute the mission defined for it. It can survive through its life cycle in that environment. So that is the third part, second part. And the third part is basically pushing the quality barrier, right? Only when you push the quality barrier, and we can set an ambition saying that we want to make India a drone hub of the world, because otherwise what will happen is there will be a boundary of quality which will be made within the country, because India is a very price sensitive nation, and ultimately people will always expect decreasing prices in the wake of competitions which are going to increase, and they will start simply giving lesser preference to quality which ultimately helps deliver reliability and scale both, and also global competitiveness. So if quality is compromised and for only delivering lower cost, then ultimately the bigger vision which is there to set up a globally competitive ecosystem will not be accomplished. Only through standards we can make sure that anything which is produced or used in this country cannot be below a certain quality. Okay. And the fourth most important part is that this is an emerging sector. Being an emerging sector, there is a lot of development which is going to happen, and it's very easy. The way the global markets are so dependent on each other, it's very easy for anyone to, let's say, not let the industry grow in the right direction if they want a particular country's economy to depend on only imported products, if those products are not made by a particular standards. What I'm trying to say is that low cost and low quality will dominate, and countries which are there generally in the neighborhood end up dumping such low cost low quality product, because as a country we are very fond of low cost. Whether it is coming at quality or not, that's a different thing. And that leads to generally a sabotage of the industry, which is generally at a very infant stage and trying to grow. So the standards also keep in check that anything which flows in this country cannot come at a reliability, safety and security compromise. It has to be meeting those standards, the way CE standards or other standards are there to protect the interest of the citizens which are going to interact with that technology. So these are my takes, that what is the benefit as a manufacturer, right? And how it benefits both a small let's say manufacturer or a small startup or a company, and also the overall ecosystem and the users of the technology as well.
Thanks, Vipul. I think points brought out by you on bringing in reliability towards the systems, having a minimum quality benchmark for not just a company but the overall ecosystem, some sort of a minimum entry barrier to ensure that the products that are being used in the ecosystem are deemed safe or deemed reliable up to a certain factor. And also one factor that I think you were trying to place was around interoperability and people doing their job but still being able to work together. This is specifically the case of drone parts and various types of subsystems. So good points made from the manufacturing side. Next, I would like to move on to Professor Omkar. Professor Omkar, if you could highlight a few, assessments that you did around the drone standard creation need, as well as certain challenges involved in the same.
Yeah.
Over to you,
Thank
Professor.
you, Smith, and namaste to all the panelists. I think Smith, I think you have given a very good introductory remarks, and thanks Vipul for your insight into the standards. I'll be wearing the hat of the chairman of the TED 32, that is the Committee on Drone Standardization in India, on behalf of BIS, for which I am the chairman. So here, yes, very true. Standards are very important. I think that's undoubtedly the history also has taught us that without standards, we would really not survive. In fact, in the medical electronics, for example, India lost the race just because of the standards issues. And at least in the drones, we should not lose, because as far as the drone technology is concerned, I think we are on par with almost the international companies. So in the BIS, we have about 8 subcommittees looking at all the matters that go into the standards of the drones. And we are aligned with the international standards. In fact, BIS is also associated with ISO. Then we had some webinars in which we had experts from FAA, ESA. So all these things, so we are aligned. And when you talk about importing things, I think even on the imports, we should be very, very careful. Even there, unless we follow standards from where we are importing, it's going to be very disastrous. So considering all these things, the drone standards are being formulated. I think the discussion is going on with other things. About 4 drafts, the preliminary drafts on 4 subcommittees are already on the BIS website. I only request the industry leaders to actually go through it and offer their comment. For example, QCI and DGCI, we are all closely working with formulating the standards. Industry people are also there, but we need more industries to actually look at what we are doing so that we can align ourselves and the whole ecosystem improves. While we are aware of all these reliability standards, the safety standard, the cybersecurity angle that we need to bring in, and the aspects of UTM, that is urban traffic management of these UAVs. In making the standards, we should also be aware that we should not be too overcautious to kill the industry. So that is also equally important. While we place importance to reliability, well, there is a stretch how much we can go to. For example, if you simply go with the lines of the civil aircrafts, then there is going to be too tough a certification process and it will kill the industry. So there should be a judicious line that we need to draw, how much to take and how to formulate this. Towards this, what as the from the BAS committee, I have felt as of now, what is actually should happen and what we are missing is the intense industry interaction. As you know, this forum is quite open. Anybody can participate in our discussions from the industry, but yet due to various reasons, it does not happen because we have some frequent meetings, etc. We understand. And as a part of our effort, already the agricultural drone standards are published in the Gazette of India, but it has not penetrated to industry yet. In the sense, not many, I have talked to a lot of industries who make agricultural drones, they are not aware that a standard exists. So through this panel, now I would like to request to all of you is that it is high time that we all meet together, the standards bodies, the industries, everything. Maybe a physical meeting because now all that COVID cloud is over. We should have a day long just to discuss about standards, what BAS is doing, what QCA, DGCA also has their opinions, and what the industry feels and where we should converge. I think that should happen very, very soon, very as early as possible, so that we will have a good standards for drones in the country, at least in the coming 4 to 6 months. Smith.
Thank you, Professor Omkar. Point well taken, and we'll ensure that we are able to converge more. I think the past few years have been more about the policy first, and to ensure that there is a ecosystem where the industry can survive and then thrive. And now is the entire perspective on technology development, standardization, and all of that. But I thank you for your valuable comments. Next, I will move on to Mr. C.S. Sharma, who is representing Quality Council of India. They run a very important scheme around the mandatory certification for drones under Drone Rules 2021. CS, my question to you is in two fronts. First, if you could explain in brief about the certification program that is a mandate under the law. So what is that, and what does one manufacturer do under that? And certain challenges and achievements, so both the good and the bad of that scheme that has come out. So maybe you can start with that and then talk about the further need for standardization and guidance and all of that under this certification scheme. CS, over to you.
Thank you, Smith. So, despite of a lot of efforts from all the relevant stakeholders, whether it's regulator, industry, academia, or certification bodies or accreditation bodies, across the sector, I have seen in my entire professional career that there is a myth that attaining quality and maintaining quality is a costly affair. But believe me, this is not the truth. In most of the cases, there are a number of surveys have been conducted worldwide where it has been proven that cost for good quality is always less than cost for poor quality. So in certain cases, cost for good quality may be around 3 to 10% of total revenue, and the cost of poor quality may go beyond, for example, 15 to 25% of total revenue. And there is a detailed study has been done on this aspect. When we talk about quality, entire ecosystem has got two components. One is regulatory driven system, and second is voluntary third party driven system. So as we see that, for example, in the case of civil aviation, so there is a regulator called DGCA, which is responsible for compliances and to oversee the entire compliances with respect to defined law and regulations. At the same time, we have seen that there is a PPP model which is evolving across the globe, where third-party accreditation system and accreditation framework through certification or conformity assessment can support regulators to reduce their overburden and to reduce their oversee in terms of earlier bureaucratic approach. So this PPP model we have inducted in India as well in case of drone certification or CSUS scheme. So in this model, basically private third-party certification bodies which are being authorized by scheme owner, which is Quality Council of India in this case, work as a certification body. They assess the systems of manufacturers, they assess their documentation, they assess their processes, they assess their models specifications, and after assessment they give a report which is called statement of conformity. And on the basis of that statement of conformity, the regulator, which is DGCA in this case, is supposed to take decision on certification of type certification. So I can say that since the system is being developed as per the international standards, for example, this entire scheme has been developed on ISO 17065 standard, which is a global standard for product certification. At the same time, the certification criteria and certification process, which has been defined in line with ISO 17067 standard, which is a guideline for product certification. So these standards gives this scheme a ample credibility in terms of global equivalence. As we are aware that India is also part of IF system through like NABL and NBCB. So we have got this linkage where our certification scheme can be endorsed up to a global level, and whatever certifications are being issued through this system can be equivalent to the international norms or standards or best practices. So this is all about this framework of this scheme, which has been designed and developed in accordance to multi-stakeholder engagement process, where all relevant stakeholders are engaged on a continuous basis. Number of meetings were conducted. A consensus was framed on the basis of a mutual understanding, whether it's a certification criteria, certification process, or some other requirements. And after due consensus, the scheme was published and released. And it has been seen that once the scheme was released, initially there were few challenges with respect to, for example, some certain testing requirements were new for the industry. But as those were the important and critical and significant requirements which cannot be ignored, so those were part of the certification scheme. At the same time, initially we could see that the level of documentation which was given to the certification bodies was not up to a matured level. And through lot of efforts from Quality Council of India, from DFI, from other stakeholders, we could create a initial level of sensitization among the industry, where industry is also evolving themselves to align their systems and process as per the scheme requirements. Still there are challenges, and the key challenges are for example, documentation is the one of the biggest challenge, where certain design documents, manuals, procedures, and processes need to be prepared by the manufacturers. And we understand that the system is new, and lot of startups are in the market. And we also understand that the prime focus of any startup is basically on business processes and business vision and systems. But at the same time, we have to also understand, as Omkar sir has also told, and Vipul has also talked about this, that if we would like to attain speed, scale, then we have to integrate quality along with speed and scale to attain sustainability. So if you would like to sustain our systems and processes, and we want to be competitive in the global market, so we have to integrate all those four aspects. So I suppose this is a very great initiatives in the sector of civil aviations, and other sector will also like to replicate this system and model in their respective sectors. This entire process is digitized. There is a digital sky platform where any manufacturer can apply for type certificate. There are timelines defined for different phases of the certification process, and within 75 days it has been defined that the decision need to be taken by DGCA. 60 days has been given to certification body to do due diligence, and within 15 days DGCA has to take the decision on the type certificate. So entire process is time bound process. Entire process is very transparent process, and all those systems and processes are designed as per the feedback which we have received from all the stakeholders. Still, I can assure you that system is evolving. There are certain challenges. We are working with all the stakeholders, whether DFI, FICCI, or any other industry bodies, to resolve the initial teething troubles. And we are sure that shortly we will come up with the certain solutions on those aspects. And this system is going to be a success model for all other sectors as well. So that these are my initial remarks.
Thank you, CS. Good to know about the updates of the scheme. I'll just want to pose a follow-up question. So you did mention about the certification scheme and the requirement of it and the entire perspective on cost of quality versus cost of good quality versus cost of poor quality. So before I jump in to just share another perspective about the startups, what has been the progress of the scheme? How many people have been certified? How many are in pipeline? If you could share all of that details briefly as well.
So from the yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So since once the system is being implemented on DSP, total number of D1 form we have received around 170. Total 170 D1 form has been submitted till date on DSP, and out of those 170 forms, most of the forms were initially submitted, and those were rejected due to certain initial issues. For example, model specifications were not clear, or certain set of documents were not submitted. But right now there are 5 type certificate have been issued. 9 statement of conformance has been submitted to DGCA for their decision on type certificate, and 22 applications or D1 forms which are under process with certification bodies. So right now there are 3 certification bodies which are being approved under the schemes. We have got 6 applications which we are working on for approval of certification bodies, and we are hoping that shortly we will get some new certificate or some more certificate will be issued by DGCA, because lot of I would say iterations are going on with respect to our efforts from certification bodies or manufacturers, and slowly we can see that this number can go to 2 digits.
Understood. So just to summarize, 5 drone models already certified, 9
Yes.
in pipeline with DGCA, and 20
22 are
around
with
20
certification bodies.
yeah,
Yeah.
with the certification body. We hope that these numbers can be processed as soon as possible, and these numbers increase multifold in the coming months or so. In fact, not months, maybe weeks.
Yeah.
Just to sort of bring an additional perspective on the you know entire certification scheme. Now, most of the drone companies in the country, I'll talk about the large number and not the leaders. The leaders may be different, but a large number of companies that are into drones are startups, with a majority of the share with first-time entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs, which essentially brings a few conclusions uh, that most of them are still learning technology development as well as management of business on the go, because of the entire complexity in the drone business, and the business itself being hardware plus software. And the second one is that none of them have ever gone through any quality assurance process or any testing process. Irrespective of that, the progress that the industry has made in the coming few months is something that is commendable. And while a lot of manufacturers or a lot of outsiders might comment by saying that, for an industry to grow, why do you need standards or why do you need certification? We can, sort of keep it open and keep it, give the industry freedom. But I think that's where 2 important points that my panelists mentioned come in. The first point that the panelists made was around why you need to have a minimum quality benchmark, and why minimum quality benchmark ensures reliability and safety uh, uh, by default. And by default, I mean the default that has been defined. If you are certified, automatically you meet the default. That's the first part. And the second part is, if there is a mandatory certification scheme, it forces everyone in some way or the other to think about quality, think about reliability, think about consistency, and think about documentation and design analysis and all of those things in detail uh, from the beginning. Maybe for a few startups that may be very small, it may look like a hindrance. It may look like a very difficult process for some, that, if I can assemble a small drone, why do I need to undergo this entire very longish, complicated, sophisticated design analysis, laboratory testing procedure? But I think in the long run, it helps a person differentiate between a hobbyist or a simple assembler and graduate towards becoming a responsible manufacturer. I think the recent months and the experience with multiple manufacturers have taught us at least that Not always freedom is something that is in the interest of the industry. Freedom could also mean a irresponsible independent manufacturer or an assembler assembling a drone and then sort of that unfortunately being crashed somewhere or unfortunately being misused somewhere, and overall sort of spoiling the credibility of the industry at large. So I mean, we talk about standardization and we talk about reliability and we talk about testing and certification. I wanted to bring in this perspective that sometimes it is okay to bring in standards and certification at very early, so that you can build in certain basic thought process of the industry from a quality focused way. So better to bring in quality standards and testing and certification very early on in the industry, in a very step by step manner, in a very gradual manner. I don't mean that you bring in a complicated process from day one and stop everything. But if it's a easy to understand process, slightly effort taking and then graduating towards higher and higher quality, I think this is the only part in the entire regulatory and governance ecosystem where we need quality to or the certification process to keep getting stricter and stricter as time goes. Whereas in the licensing and the policy and the other aspect, we always advocate about the policy and the number of licenses to keep reduce as the technology matures. Whereas quality is the only sort of perspective of regulation or perspective of administration where it is good for the quality ecosystem to keep improve and keep getting stricter as the manufacturers keep attaining minimum quality year on year or period after period, version after version. So I think that's a very important point. And maybe I'll circle back to our panelists for some additional thoughts. Vipul, you've heard from Professor Omkar and CS Sharma, and you may have certain points to add on to, or you may want to sort of seek certain clarifications or counter their views. I'll give you the opportunity first and then go in a cycling manner.
Sure. No, that's, I think we are having a good discussion and all of us are on the same page when it comes to understanding the value of the standards and how they should be implemented. I think being part on the implementation side, both interacting with the customers, competing in the market, and then trying to meet the standards and also scale on the manufacturing. There is one thing which I have, or a couple of things which I have observed, which needs to be also taken care of in this journey, is that this is a very nascent industry and it is very early stage where we are trying to just give some bare minimum reliability to everything. And right now we are looking at the overall standards of the complete equipment. However, I think slowly we need to also decide the standards or reliability factors for subsystems or component level, that if a propeller has to be made or a motor has to be made, what should be the bare minimum standard which it should meet. Naturally, when the OEMs in India or anywhere else will start meeting those standards, the overall product will become successful, because I've seen people facing challenges because they selected a wrong OEM component and there is no means to validate whether that component will meet the final standard or not. And the onus of validating that comes on the final manufacturer rather than being assured by the OEM itself. Right. And some components may have dual use, triple use in other industries, because many of these drone components are very, very specific. For example, flight controller. If you're using a flight controller, what's your hardware standard? Is it going to get burned mid of the flight after certain flights or not? While there are checks and balances kept on the equipment level, but then all of these checks and balances fall on the shoulders of the final manufacturer, right? And sometimes one ends up with a problem statement where there is no OEM component itself available with those standards, but it is being asked in the overall standard. So that is where it becomes also important that the standard expectations should be set based on the availability in the market, because those availabilities can be gradually built. Only when you define that this is the OEM component standard which will be minimum expected, the manufacturing or process of creation of those kind of standard meeting components will start, and eventually it will be available for the equipment. So the final standard should be practical, because I have seen, at least while meeting the standard, a certain expectations could not be met because there was very limited option available for those components from very select OEMs outside India, primarily China. And there is hardly much flexibility available from such OEMs, many times for small scale. to offer the details of the design so that a manufacturer like us can ascertain that yes, this component meets the standard what the certification scheme is looking for. So there comes a lot of long process. Sometimes these processes also don't exist with the labs out there, and ad hoc process has to be created, right? So I'm not saying it has to be done immediately, but that can be a gradual way of looking at it. Second thing is that since this is a very evolving, fast, very rapidly growing market, there is a consistent need to look at the next version of the standard, right, and have a outlook for next 3-4 years, right, that this is the 3-year outlook for the standards to evolve from a bare minimum perspective, and also give a tentative idea that when they will be notified. For example, I can predict that okay, today we are not asking for redundancy on certain things, but since they are flight critical, if you make your drone beyond a certain weight, this may be asked, but it will not be asked more than 1 year ahead or less than 1 year ahead, so that people like us who are doing R&D, academia, and the people who are innovating today at a very, let's say, fundamental stage and will take another 18 months to put their product out in the market should know what is expected in the 18 months in the standards ecosystem. Because after you put 18 months and suddenly a new standard is notified, you end up getting to know that 50% or 30% or 20% of your effort have went in vain because a new standard has come which you can't meet in your design, right? So that is the second thing. And third and most important thing is everything is driven by demand. Everything is driven by demand in this industry, and we need to sensitize the user side of it more than the manufacturers to demand standard product and the standard outcome. Only then the need for standard and the hunger for standard will be created, and all of it, which is making awareness, creating awareness, making it more streamlined a process, or even creating a lot of intellectual resources, which is the lack of manpower today is what most of the certification bodies are suffering from when it comes to validating documents and understanding the standards from the holistic perspective. That will get resolved because there will be more demand in the market, demand only for standard. I still see a significant majority of business going to people who are giving low cost by compromising on the standards and certifications. And these standards need to evolve from only a hardware standard to also the output standard, because when we say that drones have to be used, they are being used for certain purpose, right? The purpose sometimes can be only delivering medicine, the purpose can be mapping a particular area, the purpose can be spraying pesticide, the purpose can be only collecting video during some event or for crowd monitoring. Now, there has to be a certain standards or uptime which should be defined. For example, when we say cloud, you have to have 99 point certain percentage of uptime, right? Like those, that there has to be certain standards defined for the final output which the drone is generating, whether it is images, videos, dispatch of some goods, how it should be done, how successful it should be. Some boundaries should be defined so that when the consumption of these technologies are happening or the product is happening, it is happening for a certain outcome. People should know that what outcome to expect or demand, so that only standard products can get higher demand and preference in the market over the low standard product. And then the things which are deterrent to the standard adoption today can be removed slowly from the ecosystem. So these are some observations which I have, which we can always think upon, that how we can gradually answer these questions. Of course, it cannot be answered overnight, but there can be always a very systematic way of developing mechanisms and approaches and teams also to tackle these situations in the market.
Thanks, Vipul. That's very helpful for a lot of us to go back and think additionally on what more perspective is needed. Next, I move to Professor Omkar, and unlike Vipul, I'll request you to be slightly brief. We are having a paucity of time.
Yeah, I think I agree with Vipul. But in the BAS, we have considered most of these aspects, that it has to be futuristic also, and even subsystem level standardizations we have actually considered. That's why I would request the industry people to actively look at the standards work that we have already been doing and offer their further comments so that we can strengthen it very quickly and converge onto a standard. Now, if you look at the standards, you see one of the main difficulty is, there are a lot of these youngsters, as you rightly said, were jumping into making drone companies, who are all essentially mostly BTech graduates. But if you look at the BTech syllabus, you hardly find any topic on standards. There is hardly any university I've seen where standards is being taught as an engineering subject. Therefore, it looks little alien to people that, oh, what is the standard they are talking when they actually come into the field. And also, it is a misconception that standards will inhibit your creativity. It is not so. In fact, whatever is your creativity, if you adhere to the format of the standards, you can quickly take it to market very easily. That's what they should realize. Otherwise, you see, the standard case that we always quote is the VHS versus Sony Max cassettes that they came in the early 90s. Sony had a very great quality, but they refused to fall into the standards which was universal. Therefore, they lost the race. Although, despite their quality was good, just because they did not adhere to the standard format, they lost the race with VHS. This is a very standard case study that we always quote. So, this must be impressed upon all these youngsters. We should conduct more workshops. Uh, we should have a forum where we take it to the not only to the students level but also the entrepreneurs, so that the skill in India and make in India becomes more effective. So this is what I had to share with you. Standards, yes, we need to adhere to it. And there is a question in the chat box I saw from Ravi Kumar, whether we are in line with the other international bodies. Very much, sir. We are aligned to other international bodies. Not only that, even when it comes to the communications part of the drones, because that's also very important. We are actively engaged with the TDSI, that's the telecommunication standards body in India. We are actively engaged with us, and we have made a fairly elaborate standards considering all the components that has to go for the drone. And it's high time that yes, our team should interact with the industries. I request these forums of this nature. I think Smith is here and most of the leaders are here. So let us all get together, have a good interaction face to face if it's possible, and try to strengthen the standards and also ensure that educating people with standards, that is the stakeholders, is very, very important for the overall healthy growth of the industry for the country. Yes, Smith.
Thank you, Professor Omkar. Last word for CS Sharma, and then we move on to certain questions. Before that, to the audience, in case you have any questions, I'll request all of you to put it in the chat box. While CS is making his remark, in case you already have some thoughts in your mind, requesting all to mention your questions in the chat box, please. CS, over to you.
Thank you, Smith. So I totally agree with the comments of Dr. Omkar. That we have to take a balanced approach where we have to understand that this drone sector itself is a very vibrant, dynamic, and we have to take a risk-based approach where we have to understand that a bare minimum level of conformance to quality, safety, reliability, and security we have to ensure. And at the same time, we have to see that ample flexibility need to be given to industry to adopt those requirements which has been prescribed in the standards and quality criteria. And once industry get maturity up to that level of defined criteria, then we have to raise our bar accordingly. So if we take and follow this approach with a proper feedback system, where always we are ready to keep and a close watch what industry is saying, what industry is demanding, what is the expectation from regulator and policymaker, and if we can fulfill those appropriate requirements at appropriate time, I suppose our system will be very dynamic and we'll come across with the regular changes and frequent updates in our certification criteria for certification scheme as well. So we have to keep our system dynamic with respect to balanced representation of all the stakeholders, and I'm sure that if we can do that, we will get more maturity into this ecosystem as early as possible.
Thank you, CS. We now move on to questions from the audience. I'll request members of the audience, in case you have any queries with the panelists or queries at large on the drone space and the drone standard space specifically, we'll request you to post in the chat box. We'll be available for the next couple of minutes to answer all of your queries.
Smith, we have one question.
Sure.
You might want to take that. It's in the chat box.
I think one of the questions Professor Omkar already answered by Ravi
Yeah,
Kumar.
that question was
Yes.
right. Yeah, there was one more just before that. You partially that was also answered, but in case if you
Yes.
would like to
So
add
one
any
of the
additional
questions by
comments.
Pratik is: are there any specific requirements or notifications released by the government for using drones in highway or agriculture or construction industry? Vipul, maybe if you want to take this question, I'll rephrase the question a little. Are there any explicit notifications for sectoral use of drones in any of the industries?
Definitely. In some industries, there is a guideline that you may end up, or recommendation. And in some industry, there is a mandate to a certain extent. For example, if you talk about infrastructure for highways, NHAI has mandated that every road stretch should be kind of inspected using a video collected from drone, and that onus is on the concessionaire who's responsible to operate that section of the road. And there is a certain frequency defined, maybe it is, I think, quarterly frequency, at which that road has to be that road has to be inspected using video collecting drone. And the purpose of this is to see if the road condition is adequate or not. Similarly, there is a mandate in the mining industry also, which was notified very recently in, I think, April 22 itself, that earlier the status of mine progress was being reported using satellite maps. But over a period, the Indian Bureau of Mines realized that drone maps are far more reliable and accurate for such matters. So they notified the utilization of drone-based maps to submit the annual progress report for any mine which is larger than 50 hectares in size. So these are called MCDR guidelines. One can Google about the MCDR guidelines. So these are two use cases which I am aware of. These are where the mandate, the utilization of drone has been made mandatory. While there are a lot of recommendations and support from the government to use drones for agricultural spraying purpose, I think very recently Meghalaya government has also started a hub and spoke model of drone deliveries for emergency health supply with one of the startups in partnership. And then also there is a lot of utilization of drone which is happening for schemes like Swamitwa and large scale mapping, which is again part of the projects which are being done for a lot of public welfare, especially to solve land records problem. But these are not mandated as such, but they are, because drones are able to provide the best solution, they are being adopted. Thank you.
Thanks, Vipul.
Smith, just one information for all is that the agricultural standards are already published in the Gazette of India as the standards.
Thank you, Professor Omkar, for that update. Okay, so I think we don't have any further questions.
Yeah, we don't have.
Okay, we have one question. What is the frequency of compliance and recertification for the drone industry? CS, if you want to take that question. What is the validity of the type certificate that is issued? And
validity of this statement of
yes, please.
So right now this validity of statement of conformity is 5 years, and there is no provision of surveillance in between this duration. And after 5 years or before the expiry of this 5-year duration, definitely they have to recertification.
Wonderful. So 5 years is the validity of the type certificate, and after that you can recertify or upgrade your model as deemed suitable.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. Thank you so much, panelist. Professor Omkar, I think we have some last questions coming in. Members of the audience, I think last 60 seconds for you to post questions. After that, I hand it over back to Satish. There's one question on: is any training mandatory to operate a drone? I think let me clarify and let me take that question. So here's what drone rules of the country say in 2 minutes. So please start comparing the drone logically to a car. This is how I am going to explain how drone rules are in the country. So whenever assume Maruti makes a new car, it has to undergo an entire testing and certification procedure once. After that, for example, Maruti Suzuki Swift Desire ZDI, the car is approved. Maruti is free to make 1 crore or 10 crore or how many ever cars they want of the same model, which means a manufacturer is required to undertake type certification procedure for each model that has been developed. After that, every time when Maruti sells a Maruti Suzuki Swift Desire, it has to be registered with the government and each of that has a license plate. Similarly, all drones in the country need to be registered and they need to be registered under the Digital Sky platform. It is like the drone's number plate or the registration plate. Of course, in the type certification procedure, if your drone is weighing 250 grams or low, the type certification is not required because it is considered as nano category drone. But for all drones that are beyond 250 grams, type certification is mandatory. For all drones, whether it is a toy drone or a nano drone or any class of drone, registration again is compulsory. Registration is available on Digital Sky platform. This is the analogy of the car. Now, anyone who is driving a car requires a driving license. Similarly, when you are operating a drone, you require a remote pilot certificate. Now, because driving is a old technology, it is assumed that anyone can teach anyone. It's very common, but drones is not. Hence, you don't just need to give an exam, but you also need to be trained from a approved training school, and then you get a remote pilot certificate. So one step more than the driving license. For driving license, a couple of years back, we used to just give an exam, and if you pass in the exam, you get a driving license. Here, you need to get trained, and then you give an exam. So training happens at a government approved remote pilot training organization, commonly known as drone training school. And after training, you get a remote pilot certificate, which is similar to a driving license for drones. After this, once you have an approved drone, which is registered, you get trained at an approved school, you get a remote pilot certificate or a drone training certificate. While operating, you need to have a third party liability insurance. Again, when you're driving a car, an insurance is required so that if you, in case you do a damage to any third party, you need to sort of cover that. Similar is the case for drones. Uh, at the end of all of this, in 90% of the Indian roads, you don't need any permission to drive from point A to point B. Let's say if I want to drive from my house to Professor Omkar's house, hopefully I don't need any permissions and I will just, sort of go to Professor Omkar's house if he gives me the address, that is. And
Welcome.
in 90% of the roads, you don't need any permission. You just take your car, it has to be registered, you need to have a driving license and insurance, and you can go. Similarly, in 90% of Indian airspace, which is the green zone, you don't need permission to fly drones up to 400 feet. In areas around the airport, which is about 12 kilometers around the airport, the zone is called as yellow zone. There you need permission from, again, the online platform Digital Sky. And for certain other areas like military installations or defense areas or Rashtrapati Bhavan or sensitive areas, they are defined as red zone. Even in those areas, if you want to fly, you require permission. So if someone wants to explain drone rules or the compliance of the drone ecosystem in basic sort of nature, this is how you sort of, comply with the rules, and this is, what the rules state. So I think that's it on the queries side. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, Professor Omkar, Mr. C.S. Sharma, and Vipul for joining in, and other members, Shripati IC and Satish, and other members from SAE for putting this together and contributing in whatever form and fashion. Standardization in drones is a very important subject, and overall, the quality ecosystem, if developed early in the market, will help ensure that we have a robust manufacturing ecosystem, a quality-driven manufacturing ecosystem, and that does not just help the domestic industry but the global industry at large, because India then will have a very valid and a very